Everyone, today we are diving into a challenge that so many agencies face, selling the value of strategy. We all know that strategy is important, but when it comes to selling it, pricing it, and communicating the value of it, most agencies fall short. They end up either giving it away for free, hiding it in larger scopes, or treating it like one of these one-off exercises that instead of the foundational high-value work that it actually is. So our guest today, Anastassia Laskey, founder and president of Ground Control Research. She's helped agencies transform how they deliver pitch and price strategy by bringing insights, structure, and clarity to what can often feel like a fuzzy, kind of abstract-oriented process. Whether you're struggling to sell strategy at a premium price or you're looking to sharpen your process so that it's actually scalable, this episode is going to be for you. Welcome to the show, Anastassia.
Thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
Let's start in just really kind of just getting into the depth of the stage that the vast majority of agencies really feel at the beginning of a conversation when it comes to the strategy oriented piece, because it is, as I was describing, a bit of a fuzzy piece. Is how do we really truly have a conversation about the meaning behind strategy with the client in the first place so that they don't actually lose the understanding of a value when we're talking to them?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the most important thing that I see happen with agencies is they present the idea of strategy to the clients in the wrong context or in a context that could be improved. And that sort of sets the stage wrong, if you will, in terms of keeping that strategy really fuzzy. So what really works well with clients is when you spend a little bit more time than most are comfortable spending or currently spend. When you spend more time actually going through what is the problem that the client's trying to solve, what is the outcome that the client's trying to get to, and really help the client see and yourself see and your team see what is it that is stopping the client from having that right now. Usually there's some strategic pieces that are not in place that need to be in place, right? And that is ultimately the type of strategy work that you need to be doing for them. But oftentimes if we just frame it as hey, just so you know, we do the strategy work as our first step, and so then we do these other things for you after that, it kind of falls flat. Whereas if you're spending, again, that time at the beginning, really helping the client understand the need for problem solving and connecting how the strategy is going to solve the problem, that's the best sort of stage to set with a client.
I find it very interesting. So here's two conversations, and then I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the sales process of how we can have this conversation. But I find it very interesting. I've had a client that has argued with me or debated the fact that someone is not going to be willing to spend, $10,000 on strategy. And then I've got clients that charge $1.7 million for research and strategy. And so there's just this huge gamut of what people perceive as valuable when it comes to strategy. And I mean, obviously there's strategy is as useful as the actual implementation of it. So it actually needs to be implemented, but it actually guides a lot of the conversation. So I'm curious, in your vantage point, how do we actually have this conversation earlier in the sales process so that clients actually truly understand that it's essential and not an optional thing that's nice to have?
It does depend a little bit on what type of client your agency serves, right? When it comes to what can you sell for, can you sell something for $10,000 or something for, multiple millions of dollars? But what matters just as much as the type of client you're serving is sort of how well you as a salesperson do at sizing the issue, sizing the problem that the client is going through and what that problem is worth to them in absolute dollar terms, right? So if we were to think about an initial sales conversation that an agency might have, typically what I see them do is talk about capabilities kind of right off the bat. What I'd rather see an agency do is spend more time on problem diagnosis and really digging into the numbers on, well, where is XYZ that you're doing client getting you? What's it not getting you? Again, we could go into a lot of specific examples. I'm happy to do that if you'd like, but that's where agencies skip or they gloss over that part. They're like, I got it. I have the capabilities. We can solve this for you. And they're really missing the problem sizing exercise that then makes it really hard for them to position strategy work with any confidence that the solution they're presenting, again, whether the strategy works $5,000, $10,000, $500,000, they're not able to contextualize and position the right size of strategy work. So they're guessing. And that guessing undermines their confidence, right? And then they're in front of the client picks up on that, and the client's like, what are you talking about? We don't need all this, right?
So for those of you that don't see the video, I'm nodding my head so viciously that I'm giving myself whiplash. Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, one of the things that you specifically said that is really up my alley, it's they're not getting to the numbers. They're not actually fully contextualizing and understanding the problem. And here's what I see happen so often in sales conversations, that the agency is so apt and ready and wanting to get to the proposal and actually sharing with them what it's going to cost and getting a yes, that they actually don't get the yes or end up having conversations in negotiation issues and creating more objections because they didn't slow down so that they can actually fully understand the problem. Like one of the things that I would hear very frequently when it comes to getting the numbers is like, well, they just don't know them or they're not going to be willing to share them, is one of the objections that I get to this conversation. And the other piece is even starting to ask questions about the things that they do and don't know. Right. So like when it comes to strategy, it's like, well, have you considered or answered this question about the audience? Like, do you know whether they prefer this or this type of messaging? Do you know where they are from a pain point? Like what exactly happens immediately before they decide to move forward with buying your product or your service? Like what is actually going on in their minds? What are their true pain points? What are their true desires? Like what exactly is going on? Like how much of an ICP do you have fully detailed out? Like what are the messaging frameworks that you've already utilized? Have you tested and used? And do you have any of those details that allow for those questions? Like as you start to ask more questions, it allows the client to then, and now I think I'm answering more of the question, but in my viewpoint, it's you're asking the questions that actually highlights to them what they don't know, that then highlights the value.
Correct.
What are your thoughts?
Exactly. Yeah. And let's take that example that you're talking about. So what a client already knows about their target market, their audience or audiences that they serve. Oftentimes clients will come in at a high level. If you just ask them, what do you know about your audience? They will come in at a high level and say, we know some things and we don't know some things, or we did a market research study, or we've looked at this. That's not an answer. That's them telling you what they've done. An answer to the question is actually going deeper and saying, oh, cool. Show me this. How do you know that this is true? Is that a hypothesis or is that a fact, right? How recent is that fact? Asking all of these more detailed questions does two things. One, it communicates that you actually know what you're doing as a strategist because you're not wanting to build based on a bunch of vibes and assumptions. And two, it actually shows your client how thoughtful you are and how much you care about getting this right. So you're demonstrating credible behavior in front of them. And then it's also showing the client that your agency seems to have some sort of a process that they're probably going to use to actually develop strategy. And that process starts with fact. So that's just one set of questions that you need to be asking before you get into sharing a solution or some sort of strategy proposal. But it is so powerful when you spend the time to go deeper.
There's so many things that I think that like frankly come up, but the reality is that so many people are ultimately what they're wanting to buy is assurance. So like the whole thing about this really is like understanding what are the contexts, what are the assumptions, what are the criteria that we're utilizing that allows for us to know that the direction that we are headed is the right direction to go. And this is on your clients, on the agency's clients' behalf. And understanding all those pieces, whether it's a process, whether it's thoughtfulness, whether it's the experience, all of those pieces allow for you to be able to highlight those components. And the reality is, let's say that you end up not selling the strategy. You end up doing this truncated version, bite-sized version of it because the client doesn't want to pay for it. You end up going directly into implementation. But the reality is that they're going to judge you based on how impactful that implementation is, which is entirely predicated on how thoughtful your strategy was. And so you're going to end up wasting a whole lot of your clients' dollars, time, aspirations, and your own reputation as an agency by not making sure that you did all the pre-thinking before just getting into deliverables. Like that's not the reality of what your agency's here to do, because otherwise you're competing with Upwork.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the part that sometimes in the frenzy of like a pitch and like an RFP and whatever that agencies sometimes struggle with is this pressure to sort of perform whatever the client has said they want the agency to perform versus doing things in a way that actually is going to get the result that the agency needs to get, right? So if an agency could operate from a place of abundance and not scarcity, they would look at that and say, either this isn't the right kind of client for us because they don't actually enable us to do our best work, or I need to like stop whatever this train is on whatever track and I need to pull back here and have the right kind of difficult conversations that maybe are more difficult in your head than in reality and actually get this client on the same page that the way we work as an agency is we start actually by making sure we're going in the right direction. We don't want to misuse your funds. We don't want to set you up to fail. We don't want you to have major risk down the line. And if we're not aligned on that, on a values basis, maybe we're not the right agency for you. And I think that takes a lot of, mental and emotional kind of maturity to approach conversations that way, but it definitely is the better way to serve clients.
I 100% agree with you. The thing, let's talk a little bit about the actual process. So here's an example. I've got a client at the moment that has their head of strategy is from McCann Havas kind of size of agencies and has had an incredibly prolific career, knows what she's doing, is just a brilliant mind in strategy. However, when it comes to actually creating the scope of work, every single one of them is vastly different. And while I realize that there are components to nuance with every brand and understanding the audience and all of those pieces that require different levels of research, different amount of consumer research and the amount of interviews, all those sorts of things that you need to consider to allow for you to be able to have the information that you need. But the reality is that the more nuanced that it is, it becomes a lot more difficult. And they're playing in the world of, $750,000, $500,000, $2 million for strategy. So being ad hoc and customized is okay for them.
Yeah.
But if you're doing, $20,000 strategy packages, doing them bespoke every single time becomes a problem, always doing it custom.
Yeah.
So how can we look at what is the process that we really need to follow and also be clear on what exactly does that look like inside the agency from a process perspective? And then what the client actually gets is a tangible thing at the end to provide them with that clarity.
Yeah. So the way I would advise agencies to think about their process, which I do think needs to be somewhat unique to your agency, but again, I'm going to give you the high level sort of phases and steps, is you want to think about this from the end of the strategy phase, which is what is my agency actually going to be doing with this type of client, right? And that should be fairly standard. Again, if you're niching your audience and you're not just taking random work from every kind of client, I hope you're not, you should know what you're going to be doing with that strategy output for your team, right? It's an important message to the client, but it's very important to your work. So getting really clear on exactly what we're going to do with the outputs will tell you what outputs you actually need, if that makes sense. So only do things that get you outputs that you actually need. And if we can start by saying, these are the outputs that our team needs from strategy work to do our best work, we can start to kind of engineer backwards in this process. What is it that we're going to have to create, perform, analyze, do, whatever? On the other side of the process, which is where is the client right now? This is the importance of really deep discovery of what the client does know, doesn't know, is worried about, isn't worried about, what risks their business has, what goals their business has. If you start there, what is the list of things that particular type of client in that particular type of situation, which is ideally repeatable for your business, what are the things they need to know? Honestly, those lists are probably going to be very similar, and that is what you're trying to get out of your strategy process. Now, to make it a little more process driven, I guess, you want to think about this in terms of like phases of work that you do for strategy. I fundamentally believe that strategy that just starts with strategy work is not useful. I think strategy work needs to start with insight and understanding of the actual market that client's brand serves. And they may have that information already. They may not have that information, but that is where you need to start, because having factually informed strategy is going to be a lot faster to develop, right? After you gain the insight, the next phase is turning the insight into some sort of strategic perspective point of view for the brand and for how the agency is going to help the brand overcome the challenges that the client has. So that's sort of the next phase of strategy work. And then the final phase is sort of that hybrid between implementation and actual strategy, where you're taking what you've communicated to the client and agreed upon with them as the direction for the brand, and you're converting that into actual tangible materials that are going to be used by team members and the client themselves down the line. Think of that as now we have a persona articulation that everyone is going to use from now on when we think about developing messaging, for example.
Very clear to me at the very least. What would your take be on the reality? So we're talking and starting with the output as the beginning piece of it, right? So here's how you're going to use it. Here's how that's being implemented, which I think is apt advice. Now, from a understanding of that utility, the reality of a brand as an example, let's say that the strategy is going to be utilized to produce a campaign that is going to have a $10 million advertising spend versus a strategy that we are going to be going down that is ultimately going to guide their social media campaigns and how they're producing content for a business that does $1 million a year, so that the size of what that strategy takes, the amount of inputs that you require, the research that's going to be necessary, whether you're doing desktop research or you're talking to consumers, whether you're doing stakeholder interviews, all of those pieces that then go into it. It's like realizing that you can create this like really bloated oriented strategy, or you can actually have it be more bite-sized that is actually applicable to what the client needs are. And so you don't actually have to fully blow it out of the water.
Exactly.
And I've had these kind of conversations with clients too. It's like you have this new to market brand. They've maybe investing $250,000 in launching the brand. Trying to suggest to them a $150,000 strategy package just doesn't really make sense for that brand. Like, why did we present that as the option? And so like making sure that you're thinking contextually, what does the client need? What is the risk factors to them? And how exactly is it going to be utilized, I think is apt.
Exactly.
Any additional thoughts?
Yeah. And there's a very direct correlation between risk mitigation and the size or the scope of the strategy work that you need to do, right? Bigger client spend means that there's more downside risk if it goes wrong. So therefore, we want to invest more energy into developing a more precise and a more sort of wide-reaching set of strategic materials, let's just call it that we're going to use throughout this engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that a client who's spending only, $500,000 or $1 million a year doesn't need to do any strategy work or doesn't need to do any insights work. It just means that the risk of them having something go wrong in a dollar amount is not as big. And so we don't need to spend that much time and energy and money doing that work. But I think the big thing that I see strategists struggle with is really just understanding that the process that you do to develop strategy work is the same no matter how big each piece of it is that you do, if that makes sense. And when you can start to mentally decouple the tactical actions that you are going to do for strategy development, quote unquote, and actually think more about what is my work process that I do every single time? How could I have 3 custom options where it's like, if it's a big client, I do the big thing. If it's a little client, I do the little thing. That's when you get to actually start being able to standardize and communicate more effectively to clients as well, and put that right size solution in front of that right size client.
Let me ask this question if you don't have guidance on it, but I'm curious on the like cost factor of like what the strategy is going to be used for. Is there like a percentage of direct correlation that if they're going to be spending $100,000 on this campaign after the fact of like the total spend over the course of the next couple of years, 3 to 5 years, whatever timeline, here's the total spend that they're going to have against it. What percentage should be spent in strategy? Do you have any guidance there?
Yeah. So the questions I typically ask to a client directly when I'm thinking about doing strategy work with them and for them is what is this work going to be used to do? And what is the dollar spend on that? But also what is the dollar value of that work? So if they're doing a campaign, let's just say they're going to spend $10 million and they expect to get $30 million in sales back on that $10 million in spend. I'm going to look at how are we ensuring the next $20 million in like gross profit, or however you'd calculate that, right? How are we going to ensure that $20 million is actually going to come in? And then taking a percentage look at that. So I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 5% of that total value of the work, right? Is how I usually position that to clients. So just to give even a more tangible example, I have a lot of folks I work with that are launching new brands, or they're working with an agency. They have an existing brand. They want to launch like a new brand or something like that. We'll look at what is your sales goal for year 1? What's your sales goal for year 2? And what do we know right now that gives us confidence that we can hit that goal? And what do we not know right now that's not giving us confidence? How do we ensure against that risk? So from an absolute percentage basis, it ends up being like, again, 5%, 10%, not even 10%, like 5% of like the total value to the business. But again, it's about making sure you're having the conversation with the client to contextualize on the right number.
So here's my take on from a sales perspective, and that 5% is interesting. I mean, thinking about it as like a 5% insurance to ensure that you're actually able to hit it. The reality is that the vast majority of clients are ending up choosing an agency based on the feeling that they have of trust of them, but people don't make buying decisions entirely based on their gut feeling. So you continue to be in the room because they enjoy being around you. You're asking the right questions. They feel good vibes, but then they end up making the actual spend choice based on trying to rationalize that emotional choice that they've already made. And so essentially what we're talking about right now is like, all right, we're having the conversation, asking them the questions, building the trust so that they make the emotional choice. And then afterwards, validating that, hey, we are spending 5% of your total amount of value that you're looking to be able to have to ensure that that actually comes to place. And so here's what you know, here's what you don't know, here's the risk factor. So here's how we're going to mitigate them in the process that we're going to follow. And then it becomes a whole lot more clear. I'm not saying that that's going to always result in a yes, because it won't. Yeah. But it increases the likelihood and also allows the client to make the appropriate choice.
Yeah, exactly. It allows the client to make the appropriate choice. And I also think that kind of conversation allows the agency to make the appropriate choice, because it makes certain things become very clear to the agency about how that client thinks, works, operates, makes decisions, et cetera, pre-sale. One of the things that I hear from my agency partners all the time is, we had this client situation. The client, it all went pear-shaped. The client is out of control. This person is intractable. There's all these horror stories that can come up. And I'm not saying that this is all clients by any means, but there are some of those situations that do come up. And you find that the person on the other side of the table that was a certain way during the sales process when they wanted something is a totally different kind of person at the end of the day. Having conversations that are very strategic and sort of confront the client's reality, like saying, you want to make $20 million. I'm saying you need to spend 5% of that or less in order to make sure you make $20 million. Do you agree that that is a good idea? It's very confronting for clients who live in like more of a cognitive dissonance type of a mindset. And it helps you as an agency get that clarity in advance. I just think that that's an important thing for agencies to keep in mind as well.
I don't disagree. I don't know that many think in the form of percentages, even though I mean, I do, and I would agree with that. I have two questions, I suppose. One, in the AI frontier revolution, whatever we want to call where we currently find ourselves, with loads of questions being asked about what that actually means, I see kind of two things happening, and I'm curious to hear your take. Mm-hmm. One, where people are leveraging AI too much to try to produce strategy that ultimately is producing very flat, not really precise or even well understood. Well, people then are utilizing AI to be able to synthesize information and utilizing it to speed up the process for strategy. Where do you see AI actually falling into place? How do you see it being utilized? Where do you see it being used wrong? I mean, obviously it's changing. It'll probably be different tomorrow, but how do you see it being impacted, strategy being impacted by it?
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely agree. I've seen the same things where people right now are using AI to try to replace their own effort and their own critical reasoning to make strategy materials. And that sort of falls flat, or it's not very differentiated, or it's incorrect, or they're trying to figure out, how do we use this in our workflow? So I think the most successful folks that use AI to develop strategy understand that it is a tool to help speed up workflows, not a tool to replace unique insight, and not a tool to replace human curiosity. Those are two things that are necessary to produce disruptive strategy, transformative strategy. They've always been necessary. They'll always be necessary. And so if you're just going to an AI and saying, here's some information about a client, like what should the strategy be? What you're getting out of that is just a reflection of like the average of everything, not something specifically differentiated and custom to that brand, that market, that category, all of that other stuff. So my advice is keep getting unique insight and bringing that into your strategy process and confirming things with actual fact and precision of fact, which is another thing AI is not good at. It's good at accuracy, sort of, but not precision. And then two is having this, like we talked about, having a more standardized way of thinking about your own strategy creation process allows you to look at what parts of that process could I automate or enhance through AI tools, right? What parts of the workflow could I do faster and better?
You said something that I just want to double tap on for a second, because the average of everything was your statement.
Yeah.
And the total mic drop moment. I mean, the reality is that if you're being brought on to go down a strategy process with a client, to be able to help them differentiate themselves in the industry, that's trying to take the average of what information AI has is exactly the antithesis to that. So recognizing that AI can help make things faster, figuring out how different competitors are being listed in the market, how people are communicating about them, can go and do a lot of the laborious desktop research pieces, but don't rely on it to answer your question. If you are, you're doing it wrong. I mean, the reality is, yesterday I was working on testing a custom bot that a client had created to help them with their estimate spreadsheets and creation. And the reality is that my advice that will happen later today is you can't use this for that, because it was doing basic math wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It was 2 + 2 did not equal 4 anymore. And if you are going to feel comfortable with that being the output, then we're going to disagree, and we'll have to agree to disagree, I guess. I'm not going to force you down that path. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask, what would you say is the most frequent thing that an agency owner or an agency team says to themselves about strategy that could not be more wrong?
What I hear all the time is strategy is so important, but my clients sometimes just don't get it, or it's just not as important to the client as it is to me. And to me, that is the most wrong interpretation of the situation. I get why an agency might say that because they're seeing it from their side. But if I looked at all of the communication, and I actually just did this recently with an agency owner just to kind of see, like, why do you keep saying this? What's going on here? And I found that it's because he's not explaining the value of the strategy to them in a way that makes sense to how they talk, think, operate, do what they're trying to achieve. No wonder client doesn't get the value, right? So as someone who has a market research background, I'm always trying to look at like both sides of the humans on in the situation, right? And how do we bridge sort of between the two parties and help them communicate more effectively or represent themselves better to the other side? And I think that's really the biggest thing that agency owners and teams struggle with.
I think that's good insight. I mean, the reality that I would say is that it's a harder introspective look that you then have to take in order to actually understand where things are going wrong and that you're not articulating the value. But I also would say that I don't know that I would want someone to try to explain the value rather than illuminate the value. And if we were able to explain and convince people of a concept, I mean, we wouldn't be in the political environment that we find ourselves today across the planet, and especially in the US. We wouldn't be in the current circumstance that we find ourselves. We cannot convince someone of something that they don't already believe themselves. And so all you can do is put a light on it so that they can actually make the appropriate decision. And how do you do that? You do that by asking the appropriate questions, by illuminating, not, explaining something to them. You have to make sure that they can truly understand the risk factors and they make the best possible choice. If you're trying to explain, then we're going to end up far left, far right, arguing at each other that no one's ever going to agree.
Yeah. And the thing is like, I've worked with a lot of in-house teams at brands, right? And none of them say that, strategy just isn't that valuable. What they say behind the scenes is that I don't really understand or think that this agency knows what they're doing in relation to strategy. So I'm not going to buy that. And typically they're going, Anna, can we, work with you in some way and get you to help us with insights? And then we'll do our own strategy and we'll delegate to the agency what they should do for us. And then obviously that's not the relationship agencies typically want to have with a client. So from a client point of view, I think that clients are pretty much sophisticated, savvy, like they understand the value of strategy. They're just not getting the right message that shows them that you understand that they understand this, if that makes sense. It's exactly what you're saying, Robert, where it's like, you don't need to convince them. You need to show them that you understood what they needed in terms of strategy, because they have to protect that above anything else. That's their entire job. If you can't do it or they don't get the sense that you can do it, they're going to take another approach. That's ultimately in their best interest to take a different approach.
I mean, I think that, so I was listening to a podcast episode, I want to say it was last week, and I thought it was interesting. I mean, it's this kind of tried-oriented fashion when it comes to focus groups for strategy of here's the top 5 competitors or whatever list you're going to be looking at, like have the focus group draw what it is that they think or feel about this specific brand so that you can start to determine exactly where the white space is and how to start to differentiate that brand in the market. And it's kind of the same thing, right? Of like the exact same thing that you're doing with that focus group is you're asking them a question. And so here's the thing. Do you know what your customer base feels about these 4 competitors that are your primary people that you're going to likely be up against when they're considering making a buying decision? And if they feel this way versus that way on the consumer end, then they are going to make a different choice. And so how exactly are you being able to be magnetic to the ones that should be buying from you? And then obviously the other repelling on the other end, right? And if you are the average, I'm going to continue to go back to your side, if you're the average of everything, then you're not going to differentiate. And frankly, you are going to die on the vine. Exactly. I feel like, Anna, we can continue to go for hours and hours talking about this, but I wanted to ask if listener would like to get in touch with you, talk about how they can revolutionize their strategy, make sure that they're communicating value appropriately and making sure that they're articulating that value to their prospective clients. How can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Folks can go to ana.bio. That's ana.bio. And on that site, you'll find all the ways to connect with me. And you can learn more about our awesome services that we use to empower agencies to build better strategy for their clients.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include that in the description and show notes, everybody. Anna, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a phenomenal conversation.
Thanks, Robert.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity. We're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 15-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.